is. But when it began, it was because of the Treaty of 1868, signed at Fort Laramie. That treaty said that the Indians would live in peace as long as they were given their food and clothing, and if the white man moved out of the Pahasapa, or the Black Hills. That was agreed upon, and so the Indians that signed that treaty had these commodities being given to them, and they needed a distribution point for the commodities. So the government developed these agencies. Agency is a distribution point for commodities. In other words, the Indians didn't have to live around the agency. However, most of them did out of convenience. The agency that started from that treaty moved up here in 1873 and split into two different agencies. The Red Cloud Agency was about 1.5 miles east of here, and the Spotted Tail Agency was about 40 miles east of here. So the military was moved in here in 1874 to protect the business of the agency. And they really thought they were only going to be here for a short time. However, 74 years later, they're still here. All right, one of the things I want to point that was set here to guard the Indian agency. The parade ground isn't very large, but on either side of the parade ground would have been the infantry barracks. And those were double company barracks. An infantry company back there then was 50 to 60 guys. So you would have had 100 to 120 men on either side of the parade ground. The oldest buildings here at the park today that are original are the white buildings across on the other side of the parade ground. Those are the 1874 Officers Club, quarters. They are duplexes. They were built out of adobe, but right away the soldiers found adobe doesn't work well here, so they put the siding over the top. They had about 800 square feet of living space per side, and the officers and their families were allowed to live there. Those buildings today we call the cabins, because we do rent them out to you guys during the summer months. So the three buildings here on the left side of the wagon now, these are all reproductions. They're put back on the original foundation with the specs used back then. The first chiefs that were down there, especially Red Cloud, he was really perturbed because the young men in the agency were looking up to Crazy Horse as if he were the greatest warrior of all time. So that didn't go over very well, especially with Red Cloud. So because of this jealousy, rumors got started about Crazy Horse, and they eventually filtered up to General George Crook, who at that time was at Fort Laramie. And Crook was the one who said, all right, to straighten this out, we've got to talk to Crazy Horse. So he sent an escort, military escort, out from Camp Robinson to go fetch Crazy Horse, and Crook said he himself would come down here and talk to Crazy Horse to find out what his intentions were. But that didn't work. Crazy Horse found out that the military was coming for him, and he thought that meant they were coming to put him in prison, like they had so many other war leaders before him. So he left his camp, went on the run before the escort got to him. He and his wife. He went over to the Spotted Tail Agency eventually, and that kind of makes sense when you know that Chief Spotted Tail was actually Crazy Horse's mother's brother, his uncle, so he was seeking refuge. But when he got over there, Chief Spotted Tail said, no way are you staying here. We don't want your trouble here. He said, we'll take care of him and protect your wife, but you move on. At the same time, Chief Spotted Tail was rejecting him. Lieutenant Jesse Lee, who was the acting agent at the Spotted Tail at the time, he was talking to Crazy Horse and finally convinced him that he needed to come over here and talk to Crook, that nobody was going to put him in prison. That's not what the meeting was for. Finally, Crazy Horse did come over here. Another misconception. He was not captured and brought here. He came over on his own accord. And that was flag playing the bugle to do the calls that were required to keep the soldiers knowing what was going on and when. Well, it wasn't that way. At these big posts, they used the whole band. This guy, this bandman, had to keep track of all the calls and all the musicians, which is probably another volume of history. He was the highest paid non-commissioned officer at the post, and he was the only officer on Officers' Row that had his own single unit for his family. If you're out and about and walking around, you might stop and look at that structure above the bandmaster's quarters. It's the old swimming pool of the 1930s. The officers lived here. And across this large parade ground, there is a barracks over there, and that's a recreation. The barracks was also built along with these in 1887. We call that the Buffalo Soldier Barracks, built in their honor. The Black American soldiers were in here between 1887 and 1910. This became regimental headquarters for the 9th and 10th Cavalry. And it was the 9th Cavalry that built all 12 of these buildings and laid out the parade ground in the summer of 1887. The buildings, or the Buffalo Soldiers, were given that tag, that nickname, by the Southern Cheyenne, way before Robinson was here. The Southern Cheyenne found themselves in Texas, Oklahoma, fighting these black men. Most rackets and horseshoes in that building. So if you have any questions, if I'm not out here, I'm in there. So you guys have a great time while you're here.
You too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, Roscoe, we woke you up, huh?
Yeah.
What?